as far as the stream goes. We're able to see everything. Frames are okay. So, Daniel, Red 5 standing by. Gold leader. You good?
10-4.
10-4. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to podcast number 15 with Daniel once again. Daniel, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Always. And we took you up on your offer of doing this again. And so here we are. And this podcast is going to be stationed around the lessons learned of postgraduate experiences. So, with that being said, we're going to get everything started here. Daniel, can you tell me and the audience some of your post-grad experiences in the workforce, and just once you were done with chemical engineering in the summer of 2016?
Yeah, I guess I technically need to start while I was still in school. So while I was still in school, I worked part-time doing environmental consulting remotely, part-time, so about 10 to 20 hours a week up until graduation. And after graduation, I continued that, but I took a 2-month break to go travel in Europe, um, which was a blast. Highly recommend doing something between finishing school and starting work. Um, Came back, continued doing that part-time job while looking for a full-time job, which landed me a gig with a food delivery startup. Um, yeah, my formal job title was quality engineer, but as one of the only non-computer science engineers, I was doing all types of fun stuff and travel and operations, supply chain, everything, a lot of stuff. Anyways, did that for I think about 8 months, which is when I accepted my current offer at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, full-time nuclear safety engineer analyst, where I was there for about 2.5 years, and I actually just transitioned to a product management role over there over the last month now. This was week number 5 or 6. Um, and I should say, outside from full-time work, I've been able to dabble with other areas of interest. This has included staying involved with American Institute of Chemical Engineers at a local and national level. Yeah, there you go, Jacob. You're wearing one of the shirts back from college. What else? I've also volunteered with Powerhouse Ventures to indulge in my interests in venture capital and clean tech, as well as volunteering with Clean Tech Open, just more organizing some events there, and volunteering with Techstars Startup Weekends, which is essentially like a hackathon, a little bit more focused on the business aspects and creating a business, a startup, focusing on giving the participants who are there the skill set of, hey, I have an idea. What are the next steps? So I've enjoyed all that fun stuff, and yeah, that really sums up my experiences, full-time, volunteer, extracurricular, and we'll see what the future has in store.
Yeah, quite a bit's happened in the last month. I still remember that photo of you coming back from Europe where you've got the Arc de Triomphe and you're like,
Oh yeah.
and lots happened since then. Um, and
I know.
nowadays, I still see the blockchain, LinkedIn call outs that you have, and you seem to get a fair amount of joy out of that as a side gig. Otherwise, you wouldn't keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that answers pretty well. The next question is going to be more of how did school differ from your full time work and some of the details with that people might not necessarily know before they get into their full time work.
Yeah, and As I go along, I know that we've talked previously about some things as well. So feel free to chime in.
Sure.
I would say the first thing that came to mind was work. It's 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Maybe you have a different schedule if your work allows. It's very common for people to work 9 hour days with every other Friday off. But work can, or it also may not be limited to the work day, the work week. School is nonstop. There is always something to do, tests to study for, homework, something. You usually take 3, 4, 5 classes at a time. Work, you manage your own deadlines. It's on you to make or break your schedule. Um, I would say if you opt for more of a startup type of work environment, that's where lines can get blurred. But I would say it really comes down to, is the company you're going to, is it results oriented, meaning they want you to get your work done, or is it time oriented, or is it both? Because I mean, while I was with the startup, it was definitely more results oriented, but there was also the time oriented piece of, oh, everyone in headquarters gets in at 9 or so, and it's not normal for people to leave before 6. Now, for someone who comes in at 7 or 8 and gets my work done, I was still pressured to stay there until a couple people started leaving around 5. So that's one piece, and then I would say the other piece is in school. You're paying to be there, so you are the one making decisions on what classes to take, what clubs to do, how to make the best of your time. For work, this really goes back to being results or time oriented of, you're being paid to do your job. That is all you have to do. Versus at school, you do what you want to make the most of your time. So, not to say you can't make the most of your time at work, it just may not be expected from you. And that's something to really talk about with your management of, hey, I these are my expectations. I want to grow. I want to get more experience. Even though I'm an engineer, I want to get experience in marketing, how to go ahead and make the most of your time at work. At the end of the day, both school and work gets put on your resume. So you have to figure out, how are you going to put everything together to do what you want to do, and how are you going to figure out what it is at the end of the day that you really want to do.
Versus a lot of the times in school where there's a lot of stuff you do want to do, but there's so much that is pressured by, I am paying to be here. I need to get a lot of stuff done. I have way more work than I could possibly manage. So I'm going to have to just keep fighting the biggest fights, and hopefully that will give me the biggest win for my time and go from there. And not to mention the social circles in college being a lot more complex. Um, but fortunately, there is that sense of closeness that I think in school that I don't necessarily can match when I go into a place that's driven by work, where you're here for work, and then when work's done, you're gone. So, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's not 9 to 5. In my case, I'm a big exception with the 12-hour day schedule, but you end up getting half the week off, if, in contrast to working only half the week. That's cool, but keep in mind the challenges with that and the difference in 9 to 5. I'd say the one cool thing about 12s that you brought up was you don't have to worry about leaving a little or at the 12-hour mark when you're done. When you hit your 12, you're done. Even if people are coming in like mad, you hit your 12 hour, you can leave. Um,
Hmm.
with the 9 to 5, though, I totally see that pressure because you've got bosses still around. Maybe they got to stay late. And if they see your habits consistently, there's an accountability there that is kind of nerve wracking. And that's a real thing. I mean, that happens in multiple offices that I know of, particularly my company as well that I work for right now. I've heard that talk before too. It's not as bad now as it used to be, but still,
Hmm.
nonetheless, something to consider. Um, and being tested at work's different as well because again, it really is you turn it off when you're done. There are the jobs that keep going and going and going, but really, it's up to you to turn it off. And you had to do the same thing in school. Otherwise, you'd go crazy, and then that
Hmm.
snowballs into your next day's work. And if you can't get a handle on it, well, then you're going to be kind of screwed as far as productivity. So both are on you equally. I'd say work and school, but school is you're really putting your heart and soul in it in ways that your work you may not be.
Yeah.
So that's a main difference. What were some of the things that you think people should know before getting into the full time work? Let's say if they're in college or they're just getting out of high school. What are some things that you think that they should be able to have on hand for skills?
Yeah. I mean, if you just look at it from just a basic standpoint of everyone should be able to talk with other people, those soft skills, interpersonal, time management, organization, um, that is the bare minimum. I would say the next piece, which you get from graduating high school, graduating college, having a degree in general, is you can do work, you can get your work done. Having a degree shows, hey, I am employable. And then, more from a job standpoint, of there's a lot of stuff out there, and I would say take every single opportunity to interview, even if you aren't interested in a job that you once applied for, or a round two or round three interview, because you will learn pieces about culture or management styles through those interviews that you wouldn't normally think about if you just said, "Oh, I applied to this job at McDonald's, but I'm not interested in it." It says something to go to that interview and set and then think through the process of why do I not want to work there, rather than just passing on it entirely.
And that depends on the opportunities you have at hand. If that really is an opportunity that's within your span, then I totally agree with you. But if you've got something within your scope that outpaces some of these things, maybe that would be part of your plan of why shouldn't I apply here? Well, that may not be in the tier that you're looking for, and then
Yeah.
exhaust the opportunities that you may have around you in the tier of your closest competence level, and then move down as needed. Um, but especially if you're coming out of high school or you need a part-time job or you've got nothing, the fast food industry, I mean, that really is a startup job in a lot of ways. So
Yeah, I mean it's customer service skills that will take you places, and you can twist it whatever way you want. If you managed inventory, that's a skill set. If you manage just like the transactions, that's customer service, that's financials. Give meaning to on your resume. You just have to say, this is what I did, and this is what it was good for. This is how it was used.
and I gotta say
Giving
there
each bullet
is
point purpose.
yeah, and I
Go
gotta
ahead.
say it's when you learn it on the basic level first in a job setting, and then you roll with it as you go into higher tiers of either management or different complex jobs, being able to build off of the basics has been so important for me just to even start in the industries I did. My first job was working as an assistant mechanic, and it had nothing to pertain to what our tier was in chemical engineering. But being able to deal with the basics of you're dealing with rough guys that are in a mechanics environment that have all of these different things you need to be aware of before you start thinking about design or process related issues. Maybe start with something smaller. And I'm glad I did, because that helped me with the being able to deal with people that are going to be at a chemical plant, usually people in coveralls that are kind of pissed off about something that's going on. uh, they're dealing with a rather hazardous environment, such as flammable gases or high pressure situations or confined spaces. Being able to see all that at 20, it was really cool, because now I'm not as underdeveloped going into something in the chemical industry where they've got even more hazards than a particular mechanic shop. So that was critical to me as well, in developing those skill sets that were able to manifest. So
Hmm.
I have to agree with that. Even if it is something like customer service, there there's a market for it, and as long as you have clients, there will always be a market for it. Uh, as much as I don't like working with clients myself, that is nonetheless a really good skill.
Hmm.
So the people skills that you mentioned, hands down, that's a foundation. People have a tendency to think that that's not so important, and then it really bites them in the butt. Um, Perhaps there's some better expectations we can give people today, in this podcast, so that way they can actually reconsider their expectations getting into our futures. What do you think about that, Daniel?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree.
Do we have any suggestions, perhaps, so that way they can just learn from this? How could we develop these proper expectations for our future?
You know, expectations, it's you don't know until you get experience. But then, how do you get experience if you don't know? There's a bit of which comes first, chicken and the egg there. But
Yeah, it's the paradox. Remember the Frodo meme? So I need to get experience to get experience.
yeah.
That yeah, it's
So I mean, I would say when it comes to um, proper just expectations in general, it's more of okay, I'm coming into this internship, this job, or whatever. This is what I want to gain out of it. Have that in mind, and if you have an idea, it doesn't have to be right away of what you want to do next. Um, I want to go. I'm an engineer, and I want to get experience in marketing. If that's the case. You kind of try to start feeling out what are the opportunities for growing and learning that skill set or doing some of that part time or outside of your job. That's kind of what I've done with my career of um, I've been able to pick up pretty quickly. So working with a startup, I knew this is not a long-term hold. This company doesn't really know what it's doing in terms of strategy and growth, trying to do too much too fast. But I can gain customer success, product management experience, operations, expansion, all this experience in less than a year and take that and do something with it. With my current role, now it's okay, I'm paying the bills. Like the job pays the bills, but it's more of where do I want to go next while I have this stability, which is why I've started to volunteer with organizations that I enjoy doing work with and seeing those events come together um, to just help me leverage what I've done professionally and outside of my professional career to go to where I want to go next.
So being able to get these expectations is all right. So like let's say for a startup, that's a good example. You you have a pretty good idea that this isn't a long term strategy to stick around, but you have an idea of what you could do there to build up your skills to go somewhere that has an idea of long term 5, 10, 20 year planning. And
Mm-hmm.
so having that expectation about startups is actually really important so people don't realize that, oh, all of a sudden I feel like I'm overwhelmed all the time and I need to stick around. Maybe that's not the case. Okay, well, keep that in mind about startups. They're risky. Um,
Yeah, and if I may jump in one more thing that came to mind.
mhm.
So, just expectations in general. So, startup weekends, my experience running lows, it's a 54-hour event. Teams start with just an idea and they try to build something. The last one, one team came to me and said, "Hey, we'd like your thoughts on business model." And I look at what they're thinking, and they have three different ways to do this business model, and they want to try to tackle all. I just said, what if you don't even focus on the business model? What if you just focus on this one external piece to a business model and use that as a service for those three different path streams of potential business models that you could do? What can you achieve in a 54-hour period during startup weekend? What can you achieve within 1, 3, 6 months at your job? Like that is a great question to ask at interviews of what are your expectations
And then
for
this,
me?
yeah, and then this also helps with just that planning of what can I get done in these time frames, and then hold yourself to it. And I guess the next step is, well, I want to get an incredible amount done. All right, can you get it into achievable steps? Because if not, then it's a pipe dream, and we're our expectations are a little too far. It's a little too hard to reach. If they're
Mm-hmm.
achievable steps, and you can see that, okay, it's going to turn into these planning meetings with this kind of plan as far as I want to get to X, Y, and Z in the next 5 weeks. And then here's how I'm going to do it. And then
Yeah.
I've got the personnel that can give me a hand, so that way I'm not doing this all by myself. You put all those together, you might actually be able to have something of value that you could use as a springboard for whatever else you want to do in that business world of yours.
Yeah, I actually just finished reading The One Thing by Gary Keller. It really breaks it down to, I mean, it's more broad of what's your one thing that you want to do, not just in your job, but career-wise of bigger thinking. But it can be used, that framework can be used for anything of what's the one thing you want to get done, big picture. And then you work it backwards, and essentially is what's the domino effect? What is the one thing you can do every day that helps you work towards that thing that's the big picture item.
You know, that goes to what I was hearing from this guy. I think his name's John. He's on YouTube. And he's got a channel, and he was talking about discipline. And what he said was stop trying to be disciplined and just make habits that are good and drive you towards something where you want to go. When I heard that, I'm going, oh, this isn't about getting on your case about you need to work harder and you just need to put in that extra 2 hours and grind it out. It was make the habits that are going to drive you forward. Stop trying to do it in these random sprints of, okay, I just need to do better. I just need to do better. And then you just run.
I
And then,
mean, saying better is ambiguous. It's subjective. It's just like saying, "Oh, this is good. This is bad." Okay, it's not constructive.
No, and it doesn't have that much value until you can really break it down into what you want better to be, and perhaps what your people in your network would consider better to be,
Hmm.
which is a more accurate way because we don't. Our actions are impacting our network whether we want to think about it or not, inaction or action, and habit seems to be the way out as far as getting a driving force to get something done. So, and this is something I really liked when I was in school that I actually want to get back to because it's really driving me bats, which is regardless about whatever day I was going to have, I wanted to get in some swim time in the morning so I could just clear my head and get the blood flow and just be active, whether I wanted to do it or not, which is a
Hmm.
big deal because as life got easier for me, I noticed that making habits wasn't as easy. And I think the main reason was the drive in college was so heavy because we are unemployed. We are investing our lives in this. Do not screw up. You
Hmm.
can fail badly. You can fail a little bit, but do not fail badly. And that drive got me up in the morning um, with that, okay, don't waste the investment that you're doing. And then once that was taken care of, a lot of that drive went away and shrunk because, well, the bills are paid and I was able to do what I said I would. Now maybe I don't need to take it as hard. Well, that's a bad mentality that I took over the last 2 years. That was a bad mentality. Instead, it really should be okay. Now let's get the habits that are gonna make you even more stable than where you were 7 years ago. Let's say. So, I really like what you had brought up from that book that you were talking about, and the incremental progress. I was just reading your notes again. The incremental progress keeps being brought up in this channel because that seems to be the way where you can slowly but surely tackle stuff that actually institutes progress, as opposed to I will work harder, which we tell
Yeah.
ourselves that, but it doesn't necessarily come up. Julie and I actually had a great reference to this when we were talking about truth, and we were talking about Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for
Hmm.
Life.
Yep.
And just a tangent for 1 second, we'll get back to the questions. When you say, I will do better, and you don't really do better, maybe you do 1 2% and then you get back to wherever you were, that's instituting a habit of not actually doing better but lying to yourself. And
Yeah.
if that becomes a habit, look out because, oh, I'll do better, now turns into that same routine and that circling around the mountain, just like the Jews in Exodus. Oh, we will eventually break out of the desert. They're still circling around that same mountain. And then it takes forever to break out of it. So to get rid of that bondage, Dan, I've got some other questions about finances because this is something else.
Yeah.
Once you actually have money, now you got to figure out how you're going to manage your spending and income in ways that in college, well, we're broke, okay, because we don't have an income yet, or our income's very fixed, so we're not going to go crazy. Now that we actually have disposable income, what were some of the strategies you were doing just right out of school?
Yeah. So I'm gonna start with retirement. Max out your Roth IRA, 5,500 a year. Just do it. Just throw it in like an automated ETF manager. Schwab has one I use. Wells Fargo has one. Chase has one. There's so many that use it. Just throw that money in there. Forget about it. 401k, if your company has one, do it so then it matches. So if your company matches 3% of your salary, throw it in. That's done. Great. Fantastic. Um, if you have other savings from just in general,
You can then choose to diversify. You can say, oh, I want to put some in stocks. I want to put some in real estate investments. There are some interesting apps, programs out there like Fundrise where you can invest in real estate properties. They pull that money together and invest it. Um, there's actually one I just learned of today. It's really cool when you make a purchase online. Well, this is not an investment. Forget about it. Anyways, um, retirement first. After that, um, I recommend keeping track of your expenses. There are apps that do this for you, but I have a spreadsheet because if I had an app, I just mindlessly spend, and at the end of the month, I'd look at it and be like, oh wow, I spent more than I thought. By having Excel, I keep my receipts, and then usually once I have a receipt, I want to empty it from my pockets or my desk. I open up my Excel, I plug it in, and then I can see the amount of money I'm spending and saving, both pre and post tax. Um, just keeps it at the forefront of my mind, and I'd say like it's lifestyle, it's stability. You know, question is when you spend your money, what do you want it to spend it on? Is it you want to be social and go out with friends? You want to go on travel? That's up to you. But it's just more of the thought of being mindful. Not that you have to stick to it like a diet. I, you know, a diet really should be of, oh, I am aware this is bad. I am aware spending money on coffee instead of making it myself, I'm losing $3 per transaction.
I really like what you said about the budget because so many people have some of these apps and they've recommended it to me, and I told them the exact same thing. No, I don't want it to auto do it itself because chances are I'll never look at it. So I need to enter it somewhere where I can actually get it in one area and see for myself, oh, I actually put the work in of typing every transaction that was probably above $5 if and here it is. And then
Mm-hmm.
everything is on graphs and in tables it's my sheet too, so I'm not sending an app to look at my stuff. All of this is done in house where Mint or these other apps aren't looking at it. Granted, if you're in a time crunch, I'd say that's better than no budget. But there's a tendency for people to just let it run and not pay attention to your finances at all on the budgeting end.
Yeah, and I would say the one app that I do like, um, granted, it's just all right. It's called Acorns. What it does is if your purchase is $3.50, it'll take those other 50 cents, take it out for your bank account, and invest it for you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right up your alley.
Yeah, so like, I mean, slowly over time, I don't know. I think I have like maybe $200 in there. I just let it sit. It's not going anywhere. When I put everything into my budget, I'm already rounding up anyway. But at the end of whenever I choose to withdraw that, it can be tomorrow, it can be 10, 20 years. I've saved it. It's mindless and it helps towards the saving piece and it's easy.
And that or not exponential, but the compound growth can't happen until we start early, which is what you and me
Yeah.
both decided to do early on, which was the compound growth that we need for retirement, or even the compound growth we want for actually getting something done in our lives with whatever we want to do with it, can't start unless the slow incremental progress begins now.
Yeah. So that's one piece as well. And I think I guess the other piece I'll mention is you just put your money into a savings account. Okay, great. I don't know, 0.2% interest rate right now with the economy. It's just like, okay, why would I do that when, okay, you have CDs, which are high interest savings, where you put, you get to specify, oh, I'm putting $5,000 here. You can't touch it for a month or 6 months, and that interest rate will vary. Or the stock market on average grows about 6-7% a year, depending. That's just S&P 500. It's taking it one step further of how do you want your money to grow? Do you just want your retirement money? Or also want the money that doesn't go towards retirement? What can you afford to have in the bank versus spending? All that fun stuff. Just something to consider.
Eh, Agreed. I'm not a fan of CDs myself, but I was a fan of a high interest bank account because okay,
Yeah.
so this is still I can't access it right away, but it takes a few days for it to process. But nonetheless, it can grow somewhere, and then that would be a great idea for, let's say, a housing fund. So it goes into a housing fund where you won't touch it until you want to actually put your down payment on your house. Why not let that accrue a little bit on the side?
Yeah.
So that makes sense to me. And then have a convenience bank account where maybe a brick and mortar that's like on online or something that's a little more common. So that way, if you needed to get something fast, you had it. So the hybrid uh, banking system seems to be a good choice. So with that being said, I don't have that many other questions for you, Daniel, but I did want to ask you, um, what are some of the habits that you've been doing, and this really relates back to a couple questions ago. What good habits have you started to do that have really been important to you?
Yeah. Um, I would say for me, it's come down to there's work, and then there's outside of work. That's so much time. And, it's, going back to school where you're constantly busy, you always have to do something, but now you have the time to really choose what you want to do, where you want to do stuff, whether it's hobbies, whether it's a second job, maybe you want to try to launch a startup, maybe you're raising a family. You have to figure out those priorities. But what I've been doing has been following my interests and my career of continuing networking, continuing being active in the sector I want to go to, clean technology, and um, really just making the most of the time. A couple evenings a week, I'll be in San Francisco, Oakland, going to these events because that's where I want to be, in that geography, in that location, with those people. So I would say habits should really be based off of priority, and mine have been how can I get involved with the community? How can I network? How can I continue following my interests? And I would say, even more importantly, when I graduated school, my job was not very technical. I felt like I stopped learning, and I needed that piece. So I started learning on my own. This really came down to reading books. Let's see, what books am I reading right now? Well, I just finished one. What's next? And these are just based off of interest. So I've got What Doesn't Kill Us. So looking back at before we as humans evolved to where we are today, how did we survive? I think that's interesting. I'll read business books, management books, behavioral psychology books. So there's so much media out there. Figure out what you want to consume: books, podcasts, YouTube. I mean, if it's TV, sure. I mean, there needs to be some leisure as well, but maybe you watch a documentary once a week. Maybe you watch a TED Talk. There are options.
I'm a big fan of YouTube, TED Talks, podcasts, and then when it comes to books, that's where I stumble, and I've had this problem ever since high school, where reading was such a chore. But when the podcast world really started to take off a few years ago, and I heard this was a thing 2 years ago, I jumped right in, and I was so glad that now I've got all this time that I could listen, and it's not like I can fool myself in the problem of reading, where I was reading the same page over and over again, and then the information would fall out, and I got to go grab it again. Podcasts, I could click right back to it, find the timestamps. It was a different ball game. So
Yeah.
those habits have been critical for me as well to open up to, particularly about food science and nutrition, Christianity, and how to maintain our moral structure throughout life, and being able to consider some of the other life hacks that's been showing up on YouTube the last few months. I've been really liking those, and the leisure has been fun too. But that's really the fourth priority, and as needed, it will come up. So whether watching someone play a video game or just having some fun with watching someone make some crazy food dish and call it a day. But it's so great that we've got all this real helpful information out there, and that really should be a significant portion of the media we consume in order to keep growing in our learning and not stagnate.
Yeah. And I guess before we move off of this question, I think the most important piece is maybe it's not a habit per se, but it's more of what's the one thing you can do for yourself every day? Because your work is usually for someone else. Maybe you have a family, maybe you have relationships in general. That all is coming for you and it's going to someone else. What can you do for yourself? That's most important. So maybe that's learning, maybe that's reading, maybe it's taking a nap, maybe it is watching TV, maybe it's being active. I would say whatever you need to do for yourself, that's the most important thing. And what also helps is do something, whether it's out work or outside of work, that makes you excited, that gives you a purpose to say, I want to get out of bed today and, I don't know, go skydiving. If you are an adrenaline junkie, you will want to do that, or just doing or skiing or scuba diving or whatever it is.
But having that motivation to get in and say, I am waking up today with something that I want to do for once, that seems to be a good driving mechanism. And the self maintenance that you do seems to be the key to fending off a lot of the problems that we see in modern day work life, where you're working for somebody else. That's not really for you, that's for somebody else. So all that time really isn't about what you want, it's about what they want. So when you can, get in the time to perform that self-maintenance. Yeah, I have to agree with that a lot. Dan, I've only got one last question for you. And what were the unchangeable truths that helped you get through life as a whole?
Unchangeable truths. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing was during school, it was just like, oh, once we graduate, the grass will be greener, the sky will be bluer. And sure, that might be the case. But you still need to figure out so much who you are, what you want to do, or just two of the. I mean, maybe there are some of the bigger questions, but I question my current situation weekly, at least, of is this where I really want to be? And it's a yes and no answer, and just figuring that out. And then I would say the other piece is you will fail. Just in general.
Um, whether it's relationships. I mean, there have been some friendships that have faded, and you just have, rather than letting them happen, if you accept that, great. Like, be part of that process of this is going to fail, rather than being hit with, oh, this failed. It's just a way of how do you react, how do you control. Um, so relationships, work, um, next steps in your career, typical like you will fail moment is when you submit job applications, you get so many rejections. Is that truly a failure? No. I think it's a failure if you don't have a job and you've been you've been applying for jobs for a year. Then it's more of how can you improve? So at some point, you have to turn it around and look at how can I turn this around? What can I do better? Which goes back to what is better.
Yeah, what is better? Yeah, define it. If there's anything to get out of this video, define what is better means and
Yeah,
what you're
personally,
willing to
professionally.
negotiate.
Yeah.
So that way it doesn't turn into this, I'll do better, and then the habit ensues of, I'd say, not tangential, but depleting results that just, you don't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm really glad you said that you will fail one, because it's so easy for podcasts to just say, oh, you can really do it, you can make it happen, and you'll never get over
both are
it.
possible. I
Yeah.
encourage people to do it and to get it done and whatever it is, but in general, whether it's you will fail on that or you will fail in something else, it's an unchangeable truth. That was the question, and it's more of how do you handle it?
And that goes back to the expectations thing too, because
Yeah.
a lot of people like myself, coming from a farm town, didn't have any good expectations coming in other than I will leave this poor town that doesn't have any opportunity and go somewhere that does. Failure to me was just devastating, because it felt like it was threatening who I was as a person. That happens to everybody. Let's get that straight. And it's really important to iron that out early, so when things do eventually fail, you can find the next corrective action, or if there's nothing left to do, move on, which is something that I don't always do well at. But this has been very helpful, just to be able to put these ideas together and flush them out with you. So, with that said, Daniel, thank you very much for your input. I really liked what you had to say about habits, the finances, and being able to just be realistic about life, and break those stupid dreams we had of the grass is always greener when you're graduating at 22 years old.
Shit will happen. Whether you expect it or not.
Well, with that said, Daniel, I'm going to end the stream here. I'm very glad I had you on today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. See you, everyone.